Parents will, do the things they need for their children. The kinds of regulations that most people think are great for homeschooling really are counterintuitive to what children need and why homeschooling works. Homeschooling works because the parents who are closest to the kids tailor their education to their children's interests, their aptitudes, their needs. Increased regulation will not be good for the homeschooling movement or for homeschooling families. So we've moved from regulated to liberty, and now these ESA bills are encouraging us to move from liberty to dependency. And that's just the wrong direction.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Homeschool Talks. My name is Amy Buchmeyer, and I'm a staff attorney at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Today, I have Jim Mason with me, your usual host, but he's decided to switch spots with me so that I get to be the host, and he's going to talk about education savings accounts, or ESAs. These have come up a lot in the 2023 legislative cycle, and we're really excited to dig in more about what they are and where they're coming from. So, Jim, what is an ESA?
So an educational savings account is a kind of a modern day voucher where tax money is used to be distributed to parents to pay for educational expenses, either in a private school and more today for homeschooling parents to pay for homeschool expenses. And I say it's sort of a modern day voucher. Back in the day, when Milton Friedman first kind of floated this notion that vouchers were a way to kind of make it possible for more parents to leave the public schools and pursue private education, they were literally a piece of paper called a voucher that you carried to a private school, and it paid the tuition bill. Today, we're way past kind of pieces of paper. They're often EBT cards, debit cards that you can use for approved educational expenses. Now, because of in the post-COVID world, a lot more people left the public schools and have entered private education, and in particular homeschooling. So we at HSLDA have sort of long opposed the notion of publicly funding homeschoolers. And we've taken this position very consistently for decades now. And it would kind of crop up from time to time in state legislatures. But after COVID, with the kind of mass exodus from public schools and a whole host of kind of cultural issues coming to the forefront for parents involved in public schools, more and more states are introducing education savings accounts. Some states call them education scholarships, but they are to take tax money and give them to parents to spend on educational expenses.
So what does that look like for homeschoolers?
Yeah, so, just a little bit of history. 40 and 50 years ago, homeschooling in America was kind of an unknown thing. And it was largely thought to be illegal, pretty much in all 50 states at some point or another. And so when Milton Friedman, who is considered to be the father of ed choice or educational choice, first proposed vouchers as a way to encourage parents to get their kids out of public schools and into private schools, homeschooling didn't exist in any way that was kind of known to him at the time. And so what happened in those intervening years before this flood of legislative activity proposing educational savings accounts is homeschooling started very small with a small number of parents, back in the late 70s really is when it kind of really got going. And homeschoolers developed a habit of going to state legislatures and saying, look, we want the freedom to educate our children at home according to our own principles, ideologies, religion, and so forth. We don't want anything from you. Just make it possible for us to homeschool. And so historically, homeschoolers have gone to legislatures saying, just give us liberty, leave us alone. We don't want anything else from you. And over the last few years, and especially since public schools reopened post-COVID, many people who have favored educational choice with the idea that if the money follows the child, more people will leave the public school system and do something else, have gotten a lot of momentum because of the public school exodus. And more they're including homeschoolers in the education savings account bills. And so now it's, and many of the proponents of these bills are not really kind of attuned to our objections to them. And so these bills include homeschoolers, and now homeschoolers are actually taking public money to educate their children, which really alters the nature of private home education.
What are some of the arguments for having homeschoolers in these bills?
Yeah, so the proponents of these bills, theoretically, their belief is that if parents have more options than just the public schools, that will change the nature of public schools, and it will provide more freedom to pursue different kinds of private schooling for kids. And so one of the main arguments is parents would say, well, I pay my taxes, why shouldn't I get something back to educate my children? That's kind of a big one. Another one would be for people who otherwise may not have the means to be able to either afford private schools or privately homeschool.
So what is HSLDA's response in those situations?
Yeah, so we are a liberty-based organization. We have worked for 40 years now. We're in our 40th year. We have worked to roll back the barriers to homeschooling, and they were enormous in the early days. It was illegal in most states, and most states required parents, if they wanted to teach their own kids, to have state teaching certificates. And so for years, we have worked state by state, bill by bill, to roll back the barriers to make entry into homeschooling accessible to everyone. And in those 40 years, technology has improved. 40 years ago, there weren't specific textbooks or anything like that geared towards homeschooling. There wasn't the kind of homeschooling network of community of organizations and co-ops and all kinds of things that exist today. So homeschooling grew up without public funding, without public, so our goal has been to get the government out of our business so that we can pursue privately educating our kids according to our own community standards and the way we think is best. The introduction of public money into homeschooling is going to invite increased regulation of anybody who takes the money. And there's sort of a corollary of that. And critics of my position would say, well, we have no evidence of this yet, which is largely true. We have some evidence, though, beginning this year, that once public money starts flowing, government watchdogs will want more accountability and more regulation. And so one of the arguments is that, well, if the people who take the money accept more regulation, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem for us is that anyone who teaches their children at home is viewed as a homeschooler. And that's in the perception of state legislatures for sure. And so the risk to homeschooling is that when some accept the money and some demand, and legislatures demand more accountability for those who take the money, they'll also just include everybody in the increased regulation. I mean, I have to be honest, that is my kind of prediction. We've seen a couple of bills already this year introduced, one in Arkansas and in West Virginia, where ESA money invited new legislation inviting more regulation. And I'm going to ask you a question because you have followed the situation in Arkansas. Tell us about what happened there.
Yes. So it was the same situation. We were very concerned in Arkansas because there was a bill that was going to allow homeschoolers, private public schoolers, all to access education saving account money. We requested that homeschoolers be removed and we're told there's no need for concern here as long as we're in charge. This will be the same old homeschooling you've always known and loved, plus you'll get these taxpayer dollars coming. And so it passed, went to the governor, passed the governor, and a day later, within 24 hours, there was a bill on the table from someone in the same political party as the governor and all of our the people saying not to worry, that wanted to add testing requirements to any homeschooler that accepted government or public funds was the phrase they used. So they didn't even limit it to when you're accepting ESA money. It was public funds, broadly, generally, undefined. Huge potential for mass problems moving forward if that passed.
Yeah, and so that, that's just, I think, a harbinger of things to come as these bills make their way through more and more states. Where the focus isn't on liberty, accountability is going to be the focus. And some of these bills, tremendous amounts of money are flowing, which is sort of alarming because I homeschooled 7 children over almost 30 years without accepting any, there wasn't any available to me without public money. And some of these bills, I would have brought in tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars over that time under some of these bills. So there's an enormous fiscal impact that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. But as a taxpayer, I'm also a little concerned about that in the states where they pass these. But our focus, of course, is on the health of the homeschooling movement and on the protecting the liberty that we've gained. It seems sort of sad to exchange liberty for money.
So what's an alternative to an ESA?
So what homeschooling families over the years have learned is you can homeschool children on a lot less money than what some of these ESA bills are offering. There's a tremendous number of resources. There's community. Lots of families have been able to homeschool through using, with the internet and public libraries and co-ops, private philanthropy, lots of places, lots of co-ops and private entities provide scholarships that are privately funded to homeschooling families. And so there's a really big difference between when I give my money for a charitable purpose that ends up being used for the reason that I want it to be used, than the government taking my money from me and distributing it to somebody else. It's a philosophical and a principle difference that really changes the character of the benefactor. The benefactor of private philanthropy has, it's a completely different sort of model than taxpayer money. Honestly, it's sort of it's a form of social welfare that a lot of the proponents of ESAs really don't talk about, but it's redistributing money from people who may not want their money used that way to other people because the government thinks that's the best thing. And also, let me add that we at HSLDA have a charitable arm that we call our compassion arm, which is people donate money to us so that we can help by giving grants to homeschool families who are in need so they can buy curriculum and other things. And over the last couple of years, we've given out millions of dollars to needy homeschool families.
Do you expect to see more bills like this coming in the future?
There are bills being introduced all over the country. Many legislatures have introduced these bills over the last several years. And for the most part, they didn't pass. But this year, they all have a tremendous amount of momentum. So we're watching bills in Florida and Georgia and Texas and Oklahoma. And I imagine other states will be coming along as well. I just wanted to mention that in the show notes, so this is an article that I wrote. It's called The Civic Virtue of Private Home Education, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Oppose So-Called Education Savings Accounts for Homeschoolers. Anybody that's really interested, we'll post a link in our show notes. And this article, it first saw life as a speech I gave in 2018 to our National Leaders Conference in Washington, D.C., and was since made into an article, and has then since been made into a pamphlet with an executive summary that is suitable for handing out to state legislators and others. And in this, because so the argument is a little bit more difficult to make. It takes more steps to make the argument for why we oppose publicly funded homeschooling, as opposed to, hey, here's some money. That's a pretty easy argument. We'd like to give you some money, but understanding why that's not a good idea, especially for the health of a private movement and for the liberty of private home education, takes a little bit longer. And so this was my attempt to give a really reasoned, long-form response to those who favor educational savings accounts. And I would just say that part of this article is I have been a follower and a fan of the economist Milton Friedman since the 1980s, when his book Free to Choose first came out. And so I have enormous respect for his thoughts and for his contribution to economics and to our intellectual pursuit in that realm. I just disagree with him on this one point. And in this article, I try to explain why you should listen to me and not listen to a Nobel Prize winning economist.
So if you are in a state that might have an ESA bill or want to talk to your legislator about why homeschoolers don't want the money, what would the next step be? Would it be bringing an article like that to the legislator, or how can families find more arguments?
Yeah, where bills are introduced, we have a legislative toolbox, and we're really actively involved, as you know, trying to get the word out. I would think if you think you might be in agreement with this position, read this article. It will give you some good talking points. The main talking point, of course, is that we expect that with money will come regulation, and that's the wrong direction for us. We have moved from illegal to free, where today homeschooling is unquestionably free in all 50 states. And we have modernized the homeschooling bills. We've removed a lot of arbitrary barriers. A lot of research has gone into changing the laws. For example, there was one time thought, well, you can't really homeschool unless you have a teaching certificate. And then some states said, well, if you have a bachelor's degree. And then some states said, if you have a high school diploma. And the research over the years has demonstrated that when parents decide to homeschool and are actively involved in the education of their children, none of those things matter. Year-end testing doesn't help. Parents will, do the things they need for their children. The kinds of regulations that most people think are great for homeschooling really are counterintuitive to what children need and why homeschooling works. Homeschooling works because the parents who are closest to the kids tailor their education to their children's interests, their aptitudes, their needs. They can focus on the things that they're interested in, and regulations just kind of box people in, and it's why we don't, it's why parents are leaving the public schools, because the public schools are sort of a kid factory where you put a kid in at kindergarten and you hope you get an adult out at the end. Kind of one size fits all. And I mean, I'm oversimplifying, of course, but increased regulation will not be good for the homeschooling movement or for homeschooling families. So we've moved from regulated to liberty, and now these ESA bills are encouraging us to move from liberty to dependency. And that's just the wrong direction.
Thank you for giving us a talk on ESAs. We really appreciate you switching the roles with me and being the guest today.
And if you're interested in the work of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, you can find out more about what we do on our website at hslda.org. You can look up your state's laws. You can find out what legislation is pending in your state. And if you're not a member, you can join or donate to help us advance the cause of homeschool freedom.
Every week, HSLDA hears from hundreds of homeschool families, many of whom are facing hostility from school officials or discrimination from colleges and employers. We've helped single parents facing criminal charges for homeschooling their children, families traumatized by wrongful CPS investigations, and even a grandmother harassed by the state for homeschooling her granddaughter. By donating to HSLDA, you can help make homeschooling possible for families like these and enable our work to preserve freedom for future generations. Give today at hslda.org/donate. That's hslda.org/donate. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.